The dust swirled around Delilah Foster's worn boots as the banker's men tossed the last of her belongings onto the dirt street of Ukiah, California, and she clutched her youngest son to her chest while fighting back tears that would only make this moment harder for her boys. It was September 1878, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small mining town nestled in the mountains. Her husband, Thomas, had been dead for 8 months now, killed in a mining accident that had left her with 3 sons, a mountain of debt, and a landlord who had finally lost patience. The small house they had rented for 5 years was no longer theirs, and everything they owned sat in a pathetic pile on the street while curious townspeople pretended not to stare. "Mama, where are we going to sleep tonight?" her middle son Daniel asked, his voice cracking with fear. At 10 years old, he was trying so hard to be brave, but she could see the terror in his eyes. "We will figure something out, sweetheart," Delilah said, smoothing his dark hair back from his forehead. Her oldest son, James, stood nearby, his jaw clenched in anger. At 15, he looked so much like his father that it made her heart ache. He had already tried to find work in the mines, but they told him to come back when he turned 16. The baby, little William, was only 5, and he clung to her skirts without fully understanding why their belongings were scattered in the street. "This is not right, Mama," James said through gritted teeth. "Papa worked himself to death for this town, and now they throw us out like garbage." "James, please," Delilah whispered. "We must stay calm. Getting angry will not change our situation." She looked down at the collection of furniture, clothes, and household items that represented their entire life. They had maybe $200 to their name, the last of Thomas's final wages, and what little she had managed to save from taking in laundry. It was not enough to pay the back rent, and certainly not enough to secure new lodging when every landlord in town knew she was a bad risk. The banker's men climbed back into their wagon and drove away without a backward glance. Delilah stood in the middle of the street, 3 boys looking to her for answers she did not have, and felt the weight of her situation pressing down like a physical force. She was 32 years old with no family to turn to, no husband to provide, and 3 hungry mouths to feed. The sun would set in a few hours, and they would have nowhere to go. "Mrs. Foster," a timid voice spoke behind her. She turned to see Margaret Chen, the owner of the general store, approaching with a worried expression. "I am so sorry to see this happen. Your husband was a good man." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen," Delilah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I wish I could help more, but business has been slow. I can offer you some supplies, maybe enough food for a few days, but I cannot." She trailed off, her meaning clear. She could not offer them shelter or employment. "I understand. Thank you for your kindness." As Mrs. Chen hurried away, Delilah felt the last of her hope beginning to crumble. She had already asked everyone she knew, but times were hard all over. The silver mines that had once made Ukiah prosperous were playing out, and people were starting to leave for better opportunities elsewhere. Those who remained were struggling themselves. "Mama, I am hungry," William whimpered. "I know, baby. We will eat soon, I promise." But even as she said it, she wondered how she would keep that promise. They could not stay in the street overnight. The mountain air would be cold once the sun set, and it was not safe. She needed to think, to come up with a plan, but her mind felt foggy with panic and exhaustion. That was when she heard the sound of a horse approaching at a steady pace. She looked up to see a lone rider coming down the main street, sitting tall in his saddle. Even from a distance, she could tell he was not from town. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, a dark shirt, and leather chaps that had seen better days. A bedroll and supplies were tied to his saddle, marking him as a man who spent more time on the trail than in civilization. The rider slowed as he approached, and Delilah instinctively gathered her sons closer. A woman alone with children had to be careful around strangers, especially in times like these. But as the man drew nearer, she noticed his eyes first, a striking blue-gray that seemed to take in everything without judgment. His face was weathered and tanned, with lines around his eyes that suggested he spent most of his time squinting into the sun. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, with dark hair that needed a trim and a few days of stubble on his jaw. He pulled his horse to a stop a respectful distance away and tipped his hat. "Madam," he said, his voice deep and measured, "looks like you could use some help." Delilah lifted her chin, pride warring with desperation. "We are managing, thank you." The cowboy glanced at the pile of belongings, then at the three boys, then back at her. His expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes softened. "Name is Preston Rivers. I just rode into town looking for work and a place to rest my head for a while. Could not help but notice your situation." "Delilah Foster," she replied stiffly. "And as I said, we are managing." Preston dismounted slowly, as if approaching a skittish horse. He stood there for a moment, studying the pile of belongings, and Delilah noticed he was tall and lean, with the kind of build that came from hard work rather than excess. There was a quiet confidence about him, but also a wariness that suggested he had seen his share of trouble. "No disrespect intended, Mrs. Foster, but the sun will be down in about 3 hours, and unless you have got somewhere to go, you and your boys will be spending the night in the cold. Now, I have got a place about 5 miles outside of town. It is not much, just a small ranch I bought last year when I was passing through. I have been working cattle drives mostly, coming back when I can to work the land. House is empty most of the time, and it has got plenty of room." "Sir, I do not know you," Delilah said firmly, even as her heart raced with a mixture of fear and hope. "I cannot simply go off with a stranger." "You are right to be cautious," Preston said, nodding. "Tell you what, we can go see Sheriff Morrison together. He can vouch for me, tell you I am not a threat. Then you can decide if you want to accept my offer or not." James stepped forward, placing himself between his mother and the stranger. "We do not need charity from some drifter." "James," Delilah said sharply, but Preston just looked at the boy with something like approval. "You have got spirit, son. That is good. A man should protect his family. But right now your mama needs help and I am offering it. No strings attached. My house is sitting empty and that seems like a waste when there are folks who need shelter." "Why would you help us?" Delilah asked, suspicious despite herself. "What do you want in return?" Preston was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was softer, almost sad. "Let us just say I know what it is like to have nowhere to go. And maybe I am tired of that house being so empty. A home should have a family in it, not just dust and silence." There was something in his tone, a loneliness that resonated with Delilah's own sense of isolation. She studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or ill intent, but all she saw was a man who seemed as alone in the world as she felt. "Let us go see the sheriff," she said finally. Sheriff Morrison confirmed that Preston Rivers was indeed who he claimed to be. The lawman explained that Preston had come through town the previous year, bought the old Henderson ranch with money he had saved from years of working cattle drives, and had been back a few times to work the property. He was quiet, minded his own business, and had never caused any trouble. "He is a good man, Mrs. Foster," the sheriff said. "Bit of a loner, but decent. If he is offering to help, I would suggest you take him up on it. Otherwise, I do not know what to tell you. I cannot have you and the boys sleeping in the street, but the town does not have funds for charity right now." With no other options and night approaching fast, Delilah agreed to go with Preston to his ranch. He borrowed a wagon from the livery, loaded their belongings into it, and tied his horse to the back. The boys climbed into the wagon bed, while Delilah sat stiffly on the bench beside Preston, hyper-aware of his presence and deeply uncomfortable with the entire situation. They rode in silence for the first mile, the only sounds the creaking of the wagon and the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves. The sun was beginning to sink toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Despite her anxiety, Delilah could not help but notice the beauty of the landscape, the rolling hills covered in golden grass, the scattered oak trees, the distant peaks still capped with snow. "How old are your boys?" Preston asked finally, breaking the silence. "James is 15, Daniel is 10, and William is 5, Delilah replied, keeping her eyes on the road ahead. "Good ages. Old enough to help out, young enough to still have some childhood left. They seem like fine boys. They are everything to me. I can see that." Preston was quiet for another moment before adding, "I am sorry about your husband. Sheriff told me what happened. Mining accident, right?" Delilah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The grief was still so fresh, so raw. Some days she woke up and forgot Thomas was gone, reaching for him in the early morning before reality crashed down on her. "How long has it been?" Preston asked gently. 8 months. He died in January. There was a collapse in one of the tunnels. 7 men died that day. "I am sorry." "That is a hard thing." "Yes." They fell back into silence, but it felt less awkward now, more companionable. Delilah snuck a glance at Preston, studying his profile in the fading light. He had strong features, a straight nose, and a firm jaw. There was something weathered about him, like a man who had faced hard times and survived. She wondered what his story was, what had brought him to California, why he lived alone on a ranch instead of settling down with a family of his own. As if sensing her curiosity, Preston spoke again. "I have been on my own for a long time. Grew up in Texas, lost my parents when I was young. Bounced around from one ranch to another, working whatever jobs I could find. Saved up enough money to buy this place, thinking maybe I would put down roots, but I have spent most of the past year on the trail. Old habits die hard, I guess." "Why did you buy a ranch if you were not planning to stay?" Preston shrugged. "Thought maybe I wanted to change. Thought maybe I was tired of drifting. But then I got here, and the silence was so loud I could not stand it. I keep thinking a house needs more than just one person rattling around in it. A house needs life, laughter, noise. It needs a family." His words struck something deep in Delilah's chest. She understood that loneliness, that feeling of being unmoored and adrift. Since Thomas died, their house had felt too empty despite having 3 children in it. The absence of her husband's presence had left a void that nothing seemed to fill. "So you just offered your house to the first desperate widow you saw?" she asked, trying to inject some humor into her tone. Preston actually smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and less careworn. "Something like that. Though I will admit, when I saw you standing there in the street with your boys, trying so hard to be brave, it hit me in the chest. Reminded me that I have got something to offer that might actually make a difference to someone." They crested a hill, and Delilah saw the ranch spread out below them in the valley. It was more substantial than she had expected, with a solid 2-story house, a large barn, a corral, and several outbuildings. Fences stretched out across the property, enclosing pastures that held maybe 24 cattle. The house itself was painted white, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and side. It looked well maintained, if a bit lonely sitting there in the middle of all that open land. "It is beautiful," Delilah said softly. "It has got good bones," Preston replied. "The Hendersons built it back in the 60s. They got too old to manage it and moved to San Francisco to live with their daughter. I was lucky to get it at a fair price. House has 4 bedrooms upstairs, plus the main room, kitchen, and a small study downstairs. Barn is sound, and there is a good well that has never run dry. As they drove closer, Delilah could see the property more clearly. Wildflowers grew in scattered patches around the house, and several large oak trees provided shade near the porch. It looked like a place where a family could be happy, where children could run and play safely. Her heart ached with a mixture of hope and fear. What was she doing, coming out here with a strange man? What if this was all a terrible mistake? But what choice did she have? At least here, her boys would have a roof over their heads and a warm place to sleep. Preston pulled the wagon up to the front of the house and set the brake. The boys jumped down from the back, looking around with wide eyes. Even James seemed momentarily distracted from his anger, taking in the ranch with obvious interest. "Can we explore, Mama?" Daniel asked excitedly. "Let us get inside first and see the house," Delilah said, though she appreciated her son's enthusiasm. It was the first time she had seen any of them look happy in months. Preston unlocked the front door and pushed it open, stepping aside to let Delilah enter first. The interior was dim in the fading light, but she could make out a spacious main room with a large stone fireplace, comfortable-looking furniture, and wide plank floors that gleamed even under a layer of dust. The kitchen was visible through an open doorway, and a staircase led to the second floor. "I have not been here in about 2 months," Preston said apologetically, looking at the dust. "Place needs a good cleaning, but it is solid and warm. I will get a fire going and we can bring your things in." He moved to the fireplace and began building a fire with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, flames were crackling cheerfully, casting warm light throughout the room. Delilah stood in the middle of the space, still processing the reality of where she was. This house was 10 times nicer than the tiny place they had been renting in town. It felt like a dream, or perhaps a trap waiting to spring shut. Preston must have sensed her unease because he turned to face her directly. "Mrs. Foster, I want to be clear about something. This is not a trick, and I am not expecting anything from you or your boys. You can stay here as long as you need, no rent, no obligations. I will sleep in the barn or one of the outbuildings. You and your sons will have the house to yourselves. I will be around during the day to work the ranch, but I will give you space and privacy. All I ask is that you maybe help with some cooking and household chores if you are willing, but even that is not required." "Why are you being so kind to us?" Delilah asked, her voice breaking slightly. "People do not just give away their homes to strangers." Preston looked down at his boots, seeming to struggle with how to answer. When he looked up again, his eyes were filled with an emotion she could not quite name. "A few years back, I was in a bad way. I had been working a cattle drive that went wrong, lost everything, including my horse. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, hungry and desperate. A farmer and his wife found me on the side of the road and took me in. Fed me, gave me a place to sleep, helped me get back on my feet. They did not know me, had no reason to trust me, but they helped anyway. I asked them why, and the farmer said something I have never forgotten. He said that kindness is the only thing worth passing on in this world, so I guess I am just trying to pass it on." Delilah felt tears welling in her eyes, and this time she did not try to stop them. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means to us." "I think I do," Preston said gently. "Now let me help you get settled. Boys, want to give me a hand bringing things in from the wagon?" The next hour passed in a flurry of activity as they unloaded the wagon and arranged Delilah's belongings throughout the house. Preston showed them the upstairs bedrooms, all 4 of which were furnished with beds and dressers. Delilah chose the largest room for herself, and the boys eagerly claimed the others. William wanted to share with Daniel, leaving James with his own space, which suited the teenager just fine. By the time everything was unloaded, it was fully dark outside. Preston lit several oil lamps, filling the house with a warm glow. Delilah realized she had not eaten since morning, and her stomach was growling audibly. The boys must be starving as well. "I have got some supplies in the kitchen," Preston said. "Not much, but enough to make a simple meal. Can also bring in some vegetables from the root cellar. Do you feel up to cooking, or would you rather I take care of it tonight?" "I can cook," Delilah said quickly. She needed to feel useful, to contribute something rather than just accepting charity. "If you show me where everything is." The kitchen was well equipped, with a large cast iron stove, plenty of pots and pans, and a sturdy wooden table with 6 chairs. Preston showed her where he kept the basic supplies: flour, cornmeal, salt, coffee, and a few canned goods. He brought in potatoes, carrots, and onions from the root cellar, along with a slab of bacon from the smokehouse. While Delilah set to work making a simple supper, Preston took the boys outside to show them the barn and teach them how to care for the horses. She watched through the window as he patiently demonstrated how to remove a saddle and bridle, how to brush down a horse, and how to measure out feed. The boys listened attentively, even James, who seemed to be warming up to the stranger despite his earlier hostility. Delilah found herself studying Preston as he worked with her sons. He was patient and kind, treating them with respect rather than talking down to them. He showed James how to check a horse's hooves for stones, let Daniel help carry water to the trough, and lifted William up so he could pet the horse's nose. There was something natural about the way he interacted with them, as if he had been teaching children all his life. She turned back to her cooking, trying not to read too much into the scene. Preston was just being kind, nothing more. He had made it clear this was temporary, that he expected nothing from her. She could not afford to let herself think beyond that, could not let herself hope for something more. Hope was dangerous when you had already lost everything once. Dinner was ready within an hour: fried bacon, boiled potatoes with butter, and thick slices of bread Delilah had managed to bake in the oven. It was simple fare, but it smelled delicious, and everyone was hungry. They gathered around the kitchen table, and for a moment Delilah hesitated, unsure of the protocol. Should Preston eat with them, or would he take his meal elsewhere? Preston seemed to sense her uncertainty. "If it is all right with you, Mrs. Foster, I would be honored to join you and your boys for supper. But if you would rather I eat in the barn, I understand. Please join us," Delilah said, surprising herself. "You have done so much for us today, it is the least we can offer." They sat down together, and Preston waited politely while Delilah said grace. The boys dug into their food with enthusiasm, and even James seemed to relax as he ate. Conversation was sparse at first, everyone too hungry and tired to talk much, but gradually the tension began to ease. "Mr. Rivers, do you really own all this land?" Daniel asked between bites. "I do. About 300 acres, though I have not done much with it yet. Takes a lot of work to run a proper ranch." "Could we help?" Daniel asked eagerly. "James and me, we are strong, we could do chores." Preston glanced at Delilah, as if seeking her permission before answering. "If your mama says it is all right, I would appreciate the help. There is always work to be done around a ranch, but you should be focusing on your schooling too. Town has got a schoolhouse, does it not?" "We have not been going," James said quietly. "We needed to help Mama after Pa died." "Education is important," Preston said firmly but kindly. "Your Pa would have wanted you boys to get proper schooling, We can figure out a way for you to go to school and still help around here. Early morning chores before you head to town, evening chores when you get back. That sound fair? The boys looked at their mother, and Delilah felt a lump form in her throat. She had pulled them out of school after Thomas died, needing their help and unable to afford the small fees the teacher charged. It had weighed on her conscience, knowing she was limiting their futures. "That sounds very fair," she managed to say. "Thank you, Mr. Rivers." "Please, call me Preston. If we are going to be sharing this space, no point in being formal." "Then you should call me Delilah." Their eyes met across the table, and something passed between them, an understanding or connection that made Delilah's heart skip a beat. She looked away quickly, flustered by her own reaction. It was too soon, too fast. She was still grieving Thomas. She could not possibly be feeling attraction to another man, especially one she had just met. But as the evening wore on and they finished their meal, Delilah found herself increasingly aware of Preston's presence. The way he listened when someone spoke, giving them his full attention. The way he smiled at William's silly jokes, even when they did not make much sense. The way he treated James like a young man rather than a child, asking his opinion about ranch matters and nodding thoughtfully at his answers. After supper, Preston insisted on helping clean up, carrying dishes to the sink and heating water for washing. They worked side by side in comfortable silence while the boys explored the house, their excited voices echoing from the rooms above. "They seem like they are settling in," Preston observed, drying a plate with a dish towel. "They are resilient," Delilah said. "Children adapt faster than adults." "And how are you doing?" "Really?" The question caught her off guard. Most people asked how she was doing but did not really want an honest answer. They wanted her to say she was fine, to assure them she was coping. But something in Preston's tone suggested he genuinely wanted to know. "I am terrified," she admitted softly. "This morning I woke up not knowing where we would sleep tonight. Now we are in a beautiful house with a kind stranger who seems too good to be true. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for this to turn into something terrible." "I can understand that," Preston said. "You have been through a lot. But I promise you, Delilah, there is no other shoe. This is just what it looks like. A man with too much space offering it to a family that needs it. Nothing sinister, nothing hidden. People do not just do things out of the goodness of their hearts. Some people do not. But some people do." He set down the dish towel and turned to face her fully. "I have spent most of my adult life alone, Delilah. I have seen a lot of hardness in this world, a lot of cruelty. But I have also seen kindness, seen people help each other for no reason except that it is the right thing to do. I want to be one of those people. I want this house to be used for something good. Is that so hard to believe?" Delilah looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of deception, but all she saw was sincerity. "No," she said finally. "No, it is not hard to believe. I am sorry for doubting you. Do not apologize. You are being smart and cautious. That is what a good mother does." They finished the dishes in silence, but it was a warm silence now, free of the earlier tension. When everything was clean and put away, Preston excused himself to head to the barn for the night. "I will be up early to do chores," he said. "You and the boys sleep as late as you need. You have had a hard day." "Thank you, Preston, for everything." He tipped his hat to her and slipped out into the night. Delilah watched him go, then bolted the door behind him and leaned against it, trying to process everything that had happened. This morning she had been homeless and hopeless. Tonight she was standing in a comfortable house, her sons safe and fed, because of the kindness of a stranger. She climbed the stairs to check on the boys. All three were in James and Daniel's rooms, examining their new space with obvious delight. William was bouncing on one of the beds, giggling as Daniel pretended to be a monster chasing him. James stood at the window, looking out at the dark landscape. "What do you think, boys?" Delilah asked from the doorway. "It is amazing, Mama," Daniel said breathlessly. "We have never had this much room before. Mr. Rivers seems nice," William added. "He let me pet the horses." James turned from the window, his expression serious. "Do you trust him, Mama?" "I am not sure yet," Delilah answered honestly, "but I think he is a good man. The sheriff vouched for him, and he has been nothing but kind to us. For now, we will stay and see how things go. If anything feels wrong, we will leave." "But James, we need this." "You know we do," her eldest son nodded slowly. "I know, I just want to make sure you are safe, you and the boys." "We will be safe, I promise." She got the boys ready for bed, tucking William in and making sure Daniel said his prayers. James insisted he was too old to be tucked in, but she kissed his forehead anyway, earning a grudging smile. Then she retreated to her own room and prepared for bed, washing her face in the basin and changing into her nightgown. The bed was large and comfortable, with clean sheets that smelled faintly of lavender. Delilah lay down and stared at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling around her. Outside, she could hear the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the trees. It was peaceful in a way town had never been, without the noise of neighbors and passing wagons. She thought about Preston out in the barn, sleeping alone in the hay or wherever he had made his bed. It seemed wrong somehow, that he should give up his house for them. But she also understood his reasoning. The house did need a family. It needed life and warmth and laughter. Maybe they could give him that, at least for a little while, until she figured out her next move. Sleep came slowly, but when it finally arrived, Delilah slept more soundly than she had in months. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Sunlight streamed through the window, and for a moment she was disoriented, forgetting where she was. Then memory returned and she sat up quickly, realizing she had overslept. The sun was well up, meaning it must be at least 7 in the morning. She dressed hurriedly and went downstairs to find Preston in the kitchen, cooking breakfast. He had changed into a clean shirt and had shaved, looking more put together than he had the night before. The table was set for 4, and there was a pot of coffee steaming on the stove. "Good morning," he said with a smile. "Hope you do not mind that I let myself in. Figured I would get breakfast started." "You did not have to do that," Delilah protested, feeling awkward. "I should be cooking for you. You were tired. Figured you could use the extra sleep. Besides, I am an early riser. Been up since before dawn doing chores. Where are the boys?" "Still sleeping, I think. I will go wake them. Let them sleep a bit longer. Breakfast will keep warm." Delilah poured herself a cup of coffee and sat at the table, watching Preston work. He moved around the kitchen with easy confidence, flipping bacon and stirring a pot of oatmeal. It was strange seeing a man doing household work. Thomas had always expected her to handle everything domestic while he focused on providing income. But Preston seemed perfectly comfortable with it, as if cooking and cleaning were just normal parts of life rather than women's work. "Did you sleep well?" he asked over his shoulder. "Better than I have in months, actually. Thank you. Good. You needed it." He brought over the coffee pot and refilled her cup without asking. "I was thinking today we could get you and the boys properly settled in. Maybe go into town to get some supplies, enroll the boys back in school, things like that. I also need to pick up some things from the feed store. Preston, I cannot afford supplies right now. I have a little money, but I need to save it for emergencies. Consider it part of the arrangement. You are helping me by staying here, keeping the house in order. Seems only fair I cover the basics. Besides, I have been meaning to stock up anyway." Delilah wanted to argue, but pride was a luxury she could not afford right now. If Preston was willing to help, she needed to accept it gracefully. "That is very generous, thank you." The boys came thundering down the stairs a few minutes later, drawn by the smell of food. They gathered around the table, and Preston served up a hearty breakfast of bacon, oatmeal, eggs, and toast. The meal was lively, with Daniel chattering about all the things he wanted to explore on the ranch and William asking 100 questions about the animals. After breakfast, they all climbed into the wagon and headed to town. It felt different this time, going into Ukiah. Yesterday Delilah had been desperate and ashamed, unsure where her next meal would come from. Today she sat beside Preston, her sons in the back, and felt almost normal. People stared as they drove down Main Street, and she knew there would be gossip about the widow Foster living out at Preston Rivers Ranch, but she found she did not care as much as she thought she would. Their first stop was the general store, where Preston bought supplies with the casual ease of someone who had money to spare. He let the boys pick out a few small treats, peppermint sticks, and some taffy, earning their immediate adoration. Then they went to the schoolhouse, where Delilah spoke with the teacher, Mrs. Patterson, about re-enrolling her sons. "Of course they can come back," Mrs. Patterson said warmly. "I am so glad to hear you have found a place to stay. The whole town has been worried about you." "Mr. Rivers has been very kind," Delilah said carefully, aware that every word would be repeated and analyzed by the town gossips. "Preston Rivers is a good man," Mrs. Patterson said. "Quiet but decent. You are fortunate to have his help." They made a few more stops, including the feed store where Preston ordered supplies to be delivered to the ranch, and the post office where Delilah checked for any mail. There was nothing, but she had not really expected anything. Her only living relative was a sister back east who had not spoken to her in years, since Delilah married Thomas against their family's wishes. By the time they headed back to the ranch, it was mid-afternoon, and Delilah felt exhausted but oddly hopeful. For the first time since Thomas died, she could see a path forward, a way to keep her family together and give her boys the life they deserved. Over the next few weeks, they settled into a routine. The boys went to school during the day, and Delilah kept house, cooking and cleaning and slowly making the place feel more like a home. She planted a small vegetable garden, mended clothes, and started taking in laundry from some of the nearby ranchers to earn a bit of money. Preston worked the ranch from dawn until dusk, mending fences, tending cattle, and making improvements to the property. He was quiet and unobtrusive, giving them space but always available if they needed help. Despite his promise to sleep in the barn, Preston had moved into the small study downstairs after the first week. Delilah had insisted it was foolish for him to sleep outside when there was a perfectly good room going unused. He had accepted with obvious relief, and having him in the house felt natural, as if he had always been there. They fell into an easy companionship. Preston would come in from working in the fields, and they would have supper together, the 6 of them around the table like a real family. Afterward, Preston would sit by the fire and tell stories of his years on the trail, or James would read aloud from one of the books they borrowed from town, or they would simply sit in comfortable silence, each person lost in their own thoughts. Delilah found herself looking forward to these evenings more than she wanted to admit. Preston was easy to be around, with a dry sense of humor that often caught her by surprise and made her laugh. He listened when she talked about Thomas, never seeming jealous or uncomfortable with her grief. He was patient with the boys, teaching them ranch skills and treating them with respect. And sometimes, when their eyes met across the room, Delilah felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with attraction. She tried to ignore it, telling herself it was too soon, that she was still mourning Thomas, that Preston was just being kind and probably saw her as nothing more than a responsibility he had taken on. But the feelings persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. One evening in late October, about 6 weeks after they had moved in, Delilah was in the kitchen preparing supper when Preston came in from the barn. He had been working on repairing a broken wagon wheel, and his hands were stained with grease. He went to the sink to wash up, and Delilah found herself watching the way his shoulders moved under his shirt, the strength in his forearms as he scrubbed away the grime. "Smells good," Preston said, glancing at the pot bubbling on the stove. "What are we having?" "Beef stew." "I used some of the meat from the calf you butchered last week. One of the advantages of ranch life, fresh meat whenever you need it." He dried his hands and turned to lean against the counter, watching her work. "Delilah, can I ask you something?" "Of course. How are you really doing?" "I mean with everything. Being here, adjusting to this life." Delilah paused, considering her answer. "Honestly, I am doing better than I thought I would. When Thomas died, I felt like my whole world ended. I did not know how I would survive, how I would take care of the boys. But being here, having this stability, it has helped. You have helped more than you know." "I am glad," Preston said softly. "I have to admit, having you and the boys here has helped me too. The house feels alive now. It feels like a home." "It is a lovely home. You have done well with this place." "It is not really about the place, though. It is about the people in it." He hesitated, then added, "I have been thinking about something lately, about the future and what happens next." Delilah's heart started racing. Was he about to ask them to leave? Had she overstayed his hospitality? "What do you mean?" "I have spent my whole adult life drifting, never staying in one place too long. But lately, I have been thinking that maybe I am ready to stop drifting. Maybe I am ready to build something real, something permanent. And having you and the boys here has shown me what I have been missing all these years." "Preston, what are you saying?" He pushed away from the counter and took a step closer, his blue-gray eyes intense. "I am saying that I care about you, Delilah, about you and your boys. These past weeks, watching you bring this house to life, sharing meals with your family, it has made me happier than I have been in years. I know it has not been long, and I know you are still grieving your husband, but I wanted you to know how I feel." Delilah stood frozen, wooden spoon still in her hand, trying to process his words. Part of her wanted to run, to retreat into the safety of her grief and widowhood. But another part, a part she had been trying to ignore, wanted to step forward into this new possibility. "I care about you too," she whispered. "I have been trying not to, telling myself it is too soon, that I should not be having these feelings. But I cannot help it. You have been so kind, so patient with us. You have given us a home and made us feel safe again." Preston smiled, and the warmth in his expression made her knees weak. "Then maybe we can see where this goes. No pressure, no expectations. Just let things develop naturally." "I would like that," Delilah said, her voice trembling slightly. "I would like that very much." He reached out and gently took the spoon from her hand, setting it on the counter. Then he took both her hands in his calloused palms warm against her skin. "You have beautiful hands," he said softly. "Working hands, strong hands. They are just hands. No, they are more than that. They are hands that care for your children, that cook and clean and create a home. They are hands that keep going even when things are hard. They are incredible." Tears pricked at Delilah's eyes. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. Thomas had loved her, but he had never been particularly articulate about his feelings. Preston's words touched something deep inside her, a need to be seen and valued that she had not even realized she had. "Thank you," she whispered. They stood there for a long moment, hands clasped, eyes locked. Delilah was acutely aware of his nearness. the warmth radiating from his body, the way his thumb was gently stroking the back of her hand. She wanted him to kiss her, wanted to feel his lips on hers, but she was also terrified of moving too fast, of betraying Thomas's memory. As if sensing her internal struggle, Preston stepped back, releasing her hands. "I should wash up for dinner. The boys will be down soon." "Yes," Delilah said, feeling both relieved and disappointed. "Yes, they will." But as he left the kitchen, she touched her fingers to her lips and let herself imagine what it might be like to kiss Preston Rivers. And for the first time since Thomas died, she allowed herself to hope for a future that included love and partnership again. The days grew shorter as autumn deepened into winter. The boys were thriving, bringing home good marks from school and helping Preston with ranch chores in the mornings and evenings. James had grown close to Preston, following him around and absorbing everything the older man taught him about ranching and livestock. Daniel had discovered a love for the horses and spent every spare moment in the barn. Even little William was learning, collecting eggs from the chickens and helping feed the smaller animals. Delilah watched her sons bloom under Preston's patient guidance, and her feelings for him deepened. He was so good with them, firm but kind, expecting them to work hard but also making time to play and joke. He was becoming a father figure to them, though none of them spoke that truth aloud. It felt too soon, too presumptuous, even though it was obvious to anyone with eyes. Preston continued to court her in small, gentle ways. He brought her wildflowers he found on his rides across the property. He fixed the wobbly leg on her favorite chair without being asked. He complimented her cooking and listened intently when she talked about her day. And sometimes, when they were alone, he would take her hand or brush a strand of hair from her face, touches that made her heart race. But he never pushed for more, never demanded anything she was not ready to give. He seemed content to let their relationship develop at its own pace, and Delilah loved him for that patience, even if she was not quite ready to say the word love aloud yet. As November arrived, bringing cold winds and the threat of snow, Preston announced that he needed to make a trip to Sacramento to sell some cattle and buy supplies for winter. It would take nearly a week, and he was reluctant to leave. "Are you sure you will be all right here alone?" He asked Delilah the night before he was set to leave. They were sitting on the porch despite the chill, wrapped in blankets and watching the stars. "We will be fine," Delilah assured him. "James is practically a man now, and we have the neighbors if we need help." "You have taught the boys how to handle things." "I know, but I still worry. I've gotten used to having you here, knowing you are safe." "We will miss you," Delilah admitted. "The house will feel empty without you." Preston turned to look at her, his face serious in the starlight. "Delilah, when I get back, I want to talk to you about something important, about our future." Her heart started pounding. "What about our future?" "Just something I have been thinking about, but I want to handle this business first, get everything squared away, and then we can talk properly." "Is that all right?" "Yes," Delilah said, though she was burning with curiosity. "Yes, that is all right." He reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. They sat like that for a long time, not talking, just being together under the vast California sky. Delilah memorized the feeling of his hand in hers, the way his shoulder pressed against hers through the blankets, the peaceful sound of his breathing. She was falling in love with this man, had probably already fallen, and the realization both thrilled and terrified her. Preston left at dawn the next morning, leading a string of cattle and riding his favorite horse. The boys helped him prepare, and Delilah packed food for his journey. When it was time to go, he hugged each of the boys, gave final instructions to James about the chores, and then turned to Delilah. "Take care of yourself," he said softly, for her ears only. "Come back safe," she replied, fighting the urge to throw her arms around him. He mounted his horse, tipped his hat to her, and rode out. Delilah stood on the porch with her sons and watched until he disappeared over the hill. Then she turned and went inside, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. The days without Preston felt strange and empty. Delilah kept busy with her usual tasks, but she found herself constantly looking out the window, hoping to see him riding back. The boys missed him too, though they tried not to show it. James worked extra hard on the chores, as if trying to prove he could manage in Preston's absence. Daniel spent more time with the horses, and William kept asking when Preston would be home. On the fourth day, a storm blew in from the north, bringing freezing rain and wind. Delilah worried about Preston out on the road in such weather. She made the boys stay inside, and they passed the time playing games and reading. That night, the wind howled around the house, and Delilah lay awake listening to it, praying Preston had found shelter. The next morning dawned clear and bitterly cold. Delilah bundled up and went out to do the chores, finding that the storm had knocked down part of a fence and scattered debris across the yard. She and James spent the morning cleaning up, and by afternoon they were exhausted but satisfied with their work. She was in the kitchen preparing supper when she heard the sound of a horse approaching. Her heart leaped, and she rushed to the window, hoping to see Preston. But the rider was a stranger, a young man she did not recognize. He dismounted and approached the house, and Delilah went to the door cautiously. "Madam, I am looking for Preston Rivers," the young man said, removing his hat politely. "Name is Tom Henderson. My family used to own this place." "Preston is not here right now," Delilah said. "He is away on business. Can I help you with something? Actually, I came to deliver a message from him. I ran into him in Sacramento yesterday. He asked me to ride ahead and let you know he is delayed a few days. Had some complications with the cattle sale, but everything is fine. He just wanted you to know not to worry." Relief flooded through Delilah. "Thank you so much for bringing the message. Would you like to come in for some coffee and a meal? You must be tired from the ride." "That is very kind, madam, but I need to get home to my own family. Just wanted to make sure you got the message." After Tom left, Delilah shared the news with the boys. They were disappointed that Preston would be gone longer, but relieved to know he was safe. That night, Delilah lay in bed thinking about Preston's promise to talk about their future when he returned. What did he want to say? She had a suspicion, a hope, that maybe he was going to ask about making their arrangement more permanent. The thought both excited and scared her. Was she ready for that? Ready to marry again, to give her heart to another man? She had loved Thomas deeply, and his death had nearly destroyed her. Could she risk that kind of loss again? But then she thought about Preston's kindness, his patience, the way he made her feel safe and valued. Life was risky, love was risky, but maybe it was worth the risk. 3 days later, Preston finally returned. Delilah heard the wagon before she saw it, and she rushed outside with the boys. Preston looked tired and cold, but he smiled broadly when he saw them waiting for him. "Welcome home," Delilah said, and the word home felt significant, loaded with meaning. "It is good to be home," Preston replied, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her blush. They helped him unload the wagon, which was filled with supplies and goods from Sacramento. Preston had brought presents for everyone. New books for the boys, warm winter coats, candy, and for Delilah, a beautiful blue shawl that matched her eyes. "Preston, this is too much," she protested, but she was touched by his thoughtfulness. "It is not nearly enough," he said quietly. "Not for everything you have given me." After supper that night, after the boys had gone to bed, Preston asked Delilah to sit with him by the fire. He seemed nervous, fidgeting with his coffee cup and avoiding her eyes. "Is everything all right?" Delilah asked, concerned. Everything is fine. Better than fine, actually. He set down his cup and turned to face her fully. Delilah, I told you before I left that I wanted to talk about our future. I have been thinking about this for weeks, and my time away only confirmed what I already knew. What is that? That I love you. The words hung in the air between them, simple and profound. I love you and your boys. I love the life we have built here together. I love coming home to you, sharing meals with you, watching you mother your children. I love your strength and your kindness and your courage. And I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Delilah's eyes filled with tears. Preston, I am not asking you to forget your husband, he continued. Thomas was a good man, and he gave you those 3 wonderful boys. He will always be a part of your life, and I would never try to replace him. But I am asking if you might have room in your heart for me too, if you might be willing to build a new life together as husband and wife. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Opening it, he revealed a simple gold band with a small diamond. This was my mother's ring. It is the only thing I have from her. I would be honored if you would wear it. Delilah looked at the ring, then at Preston's face, seeing the hope and vulnerability in his eyes. Her heart was pounding, and she felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to jump into the unknown. But she realized she was not afraid. With Preston, she felt safe enough to risk love again. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will marry you. The joy that spread across Preston's face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her gently. It was her first kiss since Thomas died, and it felt both strange and wonderful. Preston's lips were warm and soft, and he kissed her with a tenderness that made her want to cry. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. I promise I will spend every day trying to make you happy, Preston said. You and your boys, you are my family now. We are your family, Delilah agreed, and you are ours. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Ukiah. The whole town turned out to witness it, and if there were a few raised eyebrows about the widow Foster remarrying so quickly, most people seemed genuinely happy for them. Sheriff Morrison stood up as Preston's best man, and Mrs. Patterson from the school served as Delilah's witness. The boys stood in the front row, James looking proud and protective, Daniel grinning ear to ear, and William fidgeting excitedly. After the ceremony, Preston shook hands with each boy solemnly. I want you to know something, he said, kneeling down so he could look them all in the eyes. I am not trying to replace your father. He was a good man, and you should always honor his memory. But I promise to do my best to be a good stepfather to you, to care for you and guide you and support you in whatever you do. Can we try this together? Yes, sir, James said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for making Mama happy again, Daniel added. William just threw his arms around Preston's neck and hugged him tight. Preston hugged him back, and Delilah saw tears in his eyes. They had a simple reception at the house, with neighbors bringing food and gifts. There was music and dancing, and for the first time in nearly a year, Delilah felt truly happy. She danced with Preston, with her sons, with Sheriff Morrison, and with several of the ranchers who had become friends over the past months. As the sun set and the guests began to leave, Preston and Delilah stood on the porch, watching the last wagon disappear down the road. Preston wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her back against his chest. How are you feeling, Mrs. Rivers? He asked softly. Strange, Delilah admitted. Good, but strange. It has been a day of big changes. We have time to adjust, no rush, no pressure. We will figure this out together. They went inside and sent the boys to bed, though Delilah suspected they would be awake for hours, too excited to sleep. Then she and Preston went upstairs to the room they would now share. Delilah felt nervous, her hands trembling as she unpinned her hair. It had been so long since she had been with a man, and never with anyone but Thomas. Preston must have sensed her anxiety because he approached slowly, taking her hands in his. "We do not have to do anything tonight," he said gently. "We can just sleep if you prefer." "No," Delilah said, looking up at him. "I want this, I want you, I am just a little nervous." "So am I," Preston admitted with a small smile. "It has been a long time for me too." He kissed her then, slowly and deeply, taking his time. His hands moved to the buttons of her dress, and she let him undress her, feeling vulnerable but also desired in a way she had not experienced in years. They made love carefully, tenderly, learning each other's bodies and finding a rhythm together. It was different from how it had been with Thomas, but that was all right. This was a new chapter, a new love, and Delilah gave herself to it fully. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, Preston's arm around her shoulders, her head on his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, and she felt more at peace than she had in months. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Preston replied, kissing the top of her head. "Thank you for giving me a family, Delilah. Thank you for making this house a home." The winter passed peacefully. Snow came to the mountains, though it rarely reached the valley where the ranch sat. The family settled into their new configuration, with Preston officially adopting the role of stepfather and Delilah adjusting to being a wife again. There were moments of difficulty, times when grief would ambush Delilah out of nowhere, or when the boys would mention Thomas and a shadow would pass over the room. But they worked through these moments together, honoring the past while building the future. Preston was patient and understanding, never jealous of Thomas's memory, always willing to listen when Delilah needed to talk about her late husband. He told the boys stories about their father that he had heard from people in town, keeping Thomas's memory alive while also creating new memories of their own. The ranch prospered under Preston's management. He bought more cattle, improved the pastures, and built a new chicken coop. James became his right-hand man, taking on more and more responsibility as he approached his 16th birthday. Daniel continued to excel with the horses, showing a natural talent for training them. Even William contributed, feeding the chickens and collecting eggs with faithful dedication. Delilah took over the household completely, and under her care, the ranch became even more of a home. She painted the rooms in cheerful colors, planted flowers around the porch, and established a large vegetable garden that would keep them supplied through the summer. She also continued taking in laundry and sewing, building up a small nest egg for emergencies. As spring arrived, bringing wildflowers and baby animals, Delilah began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited a few weeks to be sure before telling Preston, choosing a quiet evening when the boys were already asleep. "I have something to tell you," she said as they sat on the porch watching the stars. Preston looked at her, immediately attentive. "What is it?" "I think I am with child." His eyes widened and a huge smile spread across his face. "Really? Are you sure?" "Pretty sure. All the signs are there. I have been through this 3 times before, so I know what to expect." Preston pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "This is wonderful news, Delilah. A baby of our own. You are happy about it?" "Happy. I am thrilled. I never thought I would have children, and now I have 3 boys and a baby on the way. I am the luckiest man alive." They told the boys the next day at breakfast. William was excited at the prospect of being a big brother, asking if he could teach the baby to collect eggs. Daniel seemed pleased but more interested in the new foal that had been born in the barn. James was quiet at first, and Delilah worried he might be upset, might see this baby as a replacement for his father. But later that day, James found her in the garden. "Mama, are you really happy?" he asked. "Very happy," she assured him. "Why do you ask?" "Because I want you to be happy. You and Pa were so good together, and when he died, I thought you would never smile again. But Preston makes you smile. He takes good care of us, and if this baby makes you even happier, then I am glad." Delilah hugged her oldest son, grateful for his maturity and understanding. "Your father would be proud of the man you are becoming," she said. "And so am I." The pregnancy progressed normally, and Delilah continued her usual work as long as she could. Preston fussed over her, trying to get her to rest more, but she insisted she was fine. She had worked through all her previous pregnancies, and this one would be no different. As summer turned to fall, Delilah's belly grew round, and the whole family prepared for the baby's arrival. Preston and James converted the small sewing room off the main bedroom into a nursery, painting it yellow and building a cradle. Delilah sewed tiny clothes and blankets, and even the boys helped, though their sewing skills left much to be desired. The baby arrived on a crisp October morning, almost exactly a year after Delilah had been evicted from her home in town. The labor was long but not complicated, with Mrs. Chen from the general store serving as midwife. Preston paced downstairs, listening to Delilah's cries and trying not to panic. The boys kept him company, James making coffee, Daniel pretending to read, and William asking questions about where babies came from that none of them wanted to answer. Finally, as the sun was setting, they heard a baby's first cry. Preston took the stairs 2 at a time and burst into the bedroom to find Delilah propped up against pillows, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "It is a boy," she said with a tired smile. "Preston, we have a son." He approached slowly, almost reverently, looking down at the tiny red face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was waving one tiny fist in the air. Preston felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "He is perfect," Preston whispered. "You are amazing. Do you want to hold him?" Preston took the baby carefully, cradling him against his chest. The infant quieted immediately, seeming to sense he was safe. Preston looked at his son, at this tiny person who had not existed a year ago when he was just a lonely cowboy with an empty house, and felt tears run down his face. "Thank you," he said to Delilah. "Thank you for this gift, for this family, for everything." The boys crowded into the room then, eager to meet their new brother. They passed the baby around carefully, each one marveling at how small he was. They decided to name him Thomas Preston Rivers, honoring both fathers, past and present. The baby would go by Tommy to avoid confusion, and everyone agreed it was perfect. Life with a newborn was exhausting but joyful. Preston was an involved father, helping with diaper changes and night feedings, walking the floor with Tommy when he was fussy. The older boys doted on their baby brother, and even James, now 16 and almost a man, would make silly faces to get Tommy to smile. The ranch continued to prosper, and Preston hired a couple of hands to help with the work, freeing up more time for him to spend with his family. He taught James to manage the books and let Daniel take charge of the horse training program they were developing. William started school and showed promise as a student, particularly in arithmetic. Delilah watched her family grow and thrive, and sometimes she could hardly believe this was her life. Just over a year ago, she had been standing in the street with all her possessions, certain that her life was over. Now she had a home, a loving husband, 4 healthy sons, and a future full of possibility. There were still hard moments. Sometimes she would see something that reminded her of Thomas, and the grief would rise up sharp and painful. But it happened less often now, and when it did, Preston was there to hold her through it. He never made her feel guilty for her grief, never seemed threatened by her love for her first husband. He understood that the heart had room for multiple loves, that honoring the past did not diminish the present. 2 years after their marriage, Delilah gave birth to another child, this time a daughter they named Pearl. Preston was utterly smitten with his baby girl, carrying her everywhere and spoiling her terribly. The boys were equally enchanted, protective of their little sister from the moment she arrived. As the years passed, the family continued to grow and change. James turned 18 and announced he wanted to start his own ranch on a piece of land adjacent to Preston's property. Preston helped him secure a loan and build a house, proud of his stepson's ambition and work ethic. Daniel stayed on the home ranch, eventually taking over the horse training program completely and earning a reputation for his skill. William proved to be academically gifted and talked about going to college, something that filled both Delilah and Preston with pride. Tommy grew into a lively, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, learning the ranch business from the ground up. Pearl was the family princess, adored by her brothers and parents alike, but also tough as nails from growing up around cowboys and cattle. Preston and Delilah added to their family twice more, another son named David, and finally another daughter named Ruth. The house that had once been so empty was now full to bursting with children and noise and life. It was exactly what Preston had wanted, what he had known it needed all along. On a warm evening in the summer of 1888, 10 years after Delilah had first arrived at the ranch with her 3 boys and nowhere else to go, the family gathered on the porch for supper. James was there with his new wife, a sweet girl from town named Anna. Daniel sat with his arm around Lucy, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. William was home from his first year at college in San Francisco. Tommy, now 9, was entertaining his younger siblings with a story about a calf that had escaped that morning. Pearl and Ruth were giggling at everything their brother said. Delilah sat beside Preston at the head of the long table they had built to accommodate everyone, and looked around at this family they had created together. Her heart was so full it felt like it might burst. Preston reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers in that familiar gesture that still made her heart skip. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly. "Just how blessed we are," Delilah replied. "How different life is from 10 years ago. Do you ever regret it?" "Coming here with me? Not for a single moment. You saved us, Preston. You gave us a home and a future. You gave me love when I thought I would never feel it again." "You saved me too," Preston said. "I was just drifting through life, not really living. You and your boys, you gave me purpose. You made me want to build something lasting. This ranch, this family, this is everything I never knew I wanted." They sat together as the sun set, surrounded by the noise and chaos and joy of their large family, and knew they had found exactly what they were looking for. The lonely cowboy had needed a family, and the widow with 3 sons had needed a home. Together, they had created something beautiful, something that would last long after they were gone. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Delilah thought about that day 10 years ago when she had stood in the street of Ukiah with all her belongings piled around her, terrified and hopeless. She thought about the stranger who had ridden up and offered help without expecting anything in return. She thought about the courage it had taken to accept that help, to open her heart to love again, to trust in the possibility of a future. "I love you," she said to Preston, as she had said countless times over the past 10 years. "I love you too," he replied, pulling her close. "Thank you for saying yes that day. Thank you for taking a chance on a lonely cowboy who just wanted his house to be a home. Thank you for seeing us when we were invisible," Delilah whispered. Thank you for caring when no one else did. Thank you for loving not just me, but my boys too. Thank you for building this beautiful life with me." The children called for their parents to join them in a game, and Preston and Delilah rose to participate, surrounded by laughter and love. The ranch stretched out around them in the gathering darkness, solid and permanent, a testament to what could be built when loneliness met need, when kindness met courage, when two broken people came together and made each other whole. Years later, when Delilah was an old woman surrounded by grandchildren and great-grandchildren, she would tell the story of how she and Preston had met. She would talk about being evicted with her 3 boys, about standing in the street with nowhere to go. She would describe the lonely cowboy who rode up and said his house needed a family. And she would always end the story the same way, with tears in her eyes and a smile on her face. "Sometimes," she would say, "the worst day of your life leads you to the best thing that ever happened to you." That day in the street, I thought my life was over. I thought I had lost everything, but I had not lost anything. I was just being led to where I was supposed to be all along. Preston needed a family, and we needed a home. And together, we built something more beautiful than either of us could have imagined alone. The ranch would remain in the family for generations, passed down from parent to child, always called the Rivers place. The house would be expanded and updated over the years, but the heart of it remained the same, the place where a lonely cowboy and a desperate widow had taken a chance on each other and found love. And if you stood on that porch on a quiet evening, some people swore you could still feel it, the love that had built this place, the courage that had sustained it, the faith that had made it possible. The house had needed a family, and it had gotten one, a family that spread out across California and beyond, but always remembered where they came from, always honored the story of how it all began, always grateful for the day when loneliness and need had met on a dusty street in Ukiah and recognized each other as the answer they had both been seeking.